I'm Glenn Campbell. I call myself a demographic philosopher. I'm looking at life and trying to predict the future through the lens of demography, or the study of human populations. Today is March 15, 2020, the Ides of March, and I'm talking once again about the COVID-19 epidemic that is now sweeping the planet. In this episode, I want to talk about one demographic aspect of the disease, something called herd immunity. This concept is important because it tells us something about when and how the epidemic is going to end. Regarding the virus, you may have heard people say, this thing is spreading so fast that eventually everyone is going to get it. And that's simply not true, at least with a viral epidemic as opposed to a bacterial one. No virus can ever achieve a 100% infection rate. Unlike a bacterium, a virus is passed from person to person and can't survive or reproduce on its own. Virus particles are shed by one person and picked up by another, but this has to happen quickly, within a couple of days, or the virus particle disintegrates. A virus can't attack anyone. It can only float around in the air or stick to a surface until someone inhales it or otherwise takes it in. The virus then hijacks a vulnerable cell and turns it into a virus factory, which spews out more little particles to be inhaled by someone else. If someone is infected by the virus, two things can happen. Either they die, or they fight off the virus and gain immunity, or at least immunity to the current version of the virus. Their body learns to detect and neutralize the virus so it can't infect them again. Herd immunity means that enough members of the population have already gained immunity that the rest don't have to worry anymore. For example, if your neighbors living on either side of you get the virus and recover, then you can no longer catch the virus from them because they're not carriers. They are unlikely to be reinfected, so they can't pass the virus on to you. If you are surrounded by enough of these people with immunity, then you are essentially immune yourself because there's no one to give it to you. Of course, a virus can mutate over time, which is why we get the flu every year. But for each specific version of the virus, you either die from it or you gain immunity. If enough people gain immunity in a given population, then the others are protected. Now, I can't tell you what that percentage is. It's going to differ by the virus and the countermeasures taken against it, but this number exists, and once that proportion is reached, the virus begins to die out. Herd immunity is connected to the R0, or the infectiousness of the virus. In the case of COVID-19, the R0 is said to be something between 2 and 3. In other words, under current conditions, each person who catches the virus gives it to, on average, between 2 and 3 other people. This isn't a fixed number, however. It can go up and down with the circumstances. If one infected person sneezes on a dozen other people, their personal R0 is going to be quite high. But if most of those people are already immune, then the R0 remains low. Once the R0 falls below 1, then herd immunity kicks in. If each person getting the virus gives it on average to less than one person, then the virus eventually expires. There may still be people in the community who have never had the virus and are not immune, but the virus can't get to them because it has run out of carriers. So how many people need to catch the virus to confer this herd immunity on all the rest? This is a matter of debate. Mathematically, it's something around 60% for this virus. But this is a moving target because people can change their behavior, and consequently the R0 will change. Right now, in the early stages of the epidemic, the R0 is between 2 and 3, but this will decrease with time, both because people become immune and because people have changed their behavior, so they are less likely to contract and pass on the bug. What this means in practice is that the number of people required for herd immunity is probably less than the 60% mathematical ideal. I'm guessing that only about 40% of the population will be getting the bug because I see that so many people around me are getting paranoid about hygiene. So long as everyone in society is desperately trying to not contract the disease, fewer people overall will get it and fewer people will die. In other words, it's not inevitable that you will get the disease. If you can maintain a high level of hygiene, say for the next year, you could skate through this without ever catching the bug. Eventually, enough members of the herd will be infected that the R0 falls below 1, and the rest of the population is safe. Herd immunity has a lot of practical implications, some of them rather unexpected, so let me talk about the ones I've thought of. The number one implication of herd immunity is that it's not inevitable that you will get the disease. To a large extent, whether or not you get the disease is under your control. You don't have absolute control, but you can shift the odds in your favor by changing your behavior. Now, I'm not going to get into what all those changes should be, but you've heard about them in the media. You should wash your hands frequently, be careful what you touch, don't touch your face when your hands have been tainted, etc. Everyone has to come up with their own hygiene plan, but if yours is smart and effective, you can greatly reduce your chances of getting the disease, and consequently, you'll reduce the chances of someone else catching the disease from you. So each person has a lot of discretion. They can change their behavior so they are less likely to both get the bug and give it to others. In this way, your own behavior contributes to the health of your entire community. This is one case where your own personal self-interest coincides with the interests of your community. By practicing good hygiene, you're not just protecting yourself, you're also helping to protect others. But there's also a non-altruistic angle to herd immunity. Even if it's not in your self-interest to get the disease, it is in your self-interest to have others get it because you need them to protect you. So let's imagine we're a brutal dictator like Kim Jong-un of North Korea. You know the virus is raging through your country and you don't want to take the risk of dying from it yourself. If you were ruthless and you understood epidemiology, you could systematically go through all the people in your inner circle and order that each of them be deliberately infected with the disease. While they're infected, they are sent away to quarantine where they either die or they gain immunity. Once they've gained immunity, they would be brought back to your inner circle, and eventually everyone around you would be immune. You couldn't get the disease because there would be no one around you to give it to you. Of course, a certain percentage of your inner circle would die, but you as the dictator would be protected. The same logic applies in the rest of the world. It is in your own best interest to not get the disease, but in the long run, it is also in your best interest that other people do get it, because it helps build up herd immunity that will protect you. From a purely selfish standpoint, the best outcome is for all of your neighbors to get the virus, but you don't. So how would this be expressed in the real world? Let's say you buy up all the hand sanitizer at your local store until you have way more than you need. This isn't really helping you, but it increases the risk for other people in your neighborhood who now can't get hand sanitizer. Nobody really thinks, I want to screw my neighbors, but that's effectively what's happening. By buying too much hand sanitizer, you are essentially encouraging your neighbors to get the disease, which will eventually protect you with herd immunity. So in one sense, we're all in this together. No one wants this thing to spread so fast that it overwhelms medical resources. In another sense, we are all competing with each other to survive. Everyone wants to be among the 50% who never get the disease and never have to risk death. It's not an overt conflict, and most people aren't conscious of it. It's more a sense that I'm going to avoid this thing because I have better hygiene than you. Right now, on March 15th, the COVID-19 epidemic is just getting started in the U.S. Less than 50 people have died so far, and nobody really knows how many have been infected because testing has been so limited thus far. Certainly everyone is talking about it, however. I was in an airport yesterday, and as I listened to snippets of conversation, it seemed like most travelers are talking about the virus and what they're doing to prevent it. This is a major shift from just 3 weeks ago when the virus was a news story, but hardly anyone in the streets of the U.S. was talking about it. From overhearing these conversations, I've come to realize that everyone has their own hygiene plan, and they can vary greatly from person to person. Some people are wearing face masks, thinking this is their best means of protection. Other people are eating garlic because they think that's going to help them. Personally, I'm a surface guy. I focus on the surfaces that my hands touch and how to protect myself from them. Some people get really paranoid and go into full bunker mode, while others refuse to do anything at all. They believe the virus is no big deal, so they see no reason to modify their behavior. A person's hygiene plan and how well they implement it are a reflection of their personality. So there are as many plans as there are people. Once someone has settled on their plan, it is hard to dissuade them of it. If they think garlic is going to save them, you just got to let them follow that path. If they're going to hoard toilet paper, just let them hoard toilet paper. Like other aspects of personality, any evidence you offer probably isn't going to change their mind. In the long run, though, some hygiene methods are better than others, and the virus itself will decide what works. Those people who are eating garlic in lieu of other precautions are more likely to be struck down, while people who can think rationally and put themselves in the position of the virus are more likely to survive. It is often noted that two classes of people are disproportionately affected by the virus: the elderly and people with pre-existing medical conditions. I propose a third class who will be disproportionately affected: stupid people. No one can be blamed for catching the disease at this early stage because none of us were prepared. But once you do have time to prepare, a lot more of the burden falls on you. Now, you can still do everything right and get the disease, but your risks are greatly reduced. On the other hand, if you do nothing right, taking no precautions whatsoever, your risk remains elevated. If your hygiene plan is stupid, you're more likely to get the disease and more likely to die, which has a certain Darwin Awards justice to it. The virus is going to take out a lot of old and sick people through no fault of their own, but it's also going to take out a lot of stupid people who should have taken precautions but didn't. So that's one of the societal conflicts right now. We have smart people competing with stupid people to be among the 50% who will eventually be protected by herd immunity. Getting the disease doesn't prove you are stupid because you can never reduce your risk to zero, but all of the other things being equal, the stupid will bear the brunt of this disease. They will choose ineffective hygiene plans and will catch the disease. Then they will either die or provide herd immunity to the rest of the population. Here's another crazy idea that's raised by herd immunity. We know that young people are relatively unaffected by the disease. Around the world, very few children have died, while people in their 20s can almost laugh the whole thing off. So how about we deliberately infect all those young people? I know it's not an acceptable policy politically, but from an epidemiological standpoint, it might theoretically help. So these days it's become standard policy to close schools in any area where the disease is suspected. This may be the right political decision, but I don't think it's backed up by science. Where are these children going to go? Lacking adequate adult supervision, they're probably going to congregate with each other and could still pass the disease among themselves and eventually pass it on to more vulnerable elders. A more sensible solution, that is scientifically sensible but not politically, you would bring them to school, lock the doors, and deliberately infect them with the disease. You could then keep them there for a month or so until they are no longer contagious, and then you could release them again into the community. Now they can't infect anyone, and in the long run, this would mean fewer deaths overall. Those who are vulnerable would be less likely to get the disease because there would be fewer infected children running around spreading it. You can do this sort of thing with a population of rats or livestock, but of course you can't do it with people. The irony of quarantines and closing schools and many other political interventions is that it may be making things worse overall. Politicians are making the decisions, not scientists, and politics is a very short-sighted endeavor. Politicians are trying to read what the public is feeling and are responding directly to those feelings. No politician could tell parents, we're going to put your child at risk to protect some old people. It just wouldn't work. In a political environment, any deliberate imposition of risk is unacceptable, which really cripples the whole system in a situation like this. So what we're left with is hysterical lockdowns and closings without any real analysis of what the long-term effects will be. I suspect that the most effective countermeasure to the virus is the more laissez-faire approach that America seems to be pursuing, where everyone is responsible for their own health and hygiene. I think that for the most part, people are paying attention. I see people opening doors in convoluted ways so they don't have to touch the handle. If enough people are behaving this way, it's probably going to do more to reduce the R0 than any government program or quarantine would. And here's another crazy idea. Donald Trump's incompetence might actually be helpful. As you may know, the response of the Trump administration to the epidemic has been less than stellar. Trump himself has called the epidemic a hoax and blamed it on his enemies. I'm not saying that I would want an incompetent leader, but there are some potential bright sides to it. A big one is that the U.S. could avoid some of the desperate bargaining actions that other countries have taken. You've heard of the 5 stages of grief. They are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Donald Trump is stuck perpetually in denial and anger, which are the only things he really knows how to do. But this may be good because the bargaining phase can get very expensive. Bargaining is when you grasp at any kind of straw to try to make the problem go away, and often these straws are very costly without any proven benefit. For example, Italy has locked down its entire country, trying to ban travel and get everyone to stay home. I have doubts about how effective this will be in the long run, but it is certainly devastatingly expensive to the economy. Closing schools here in America is also an expensive move, putting a huge burden on parents in exchange for unproven gains. These are examples of bargaining, or the desperate attempt to restore order with dubious methods. The Trump advantage is that his administration is so crippled by its own incompetence that it may not have the opportunity or wherewithal to pull off many of these desperate moves. If a competent administration had been in place, it might have already implemented quarantines, like cordoning off sections of Washington state. This competent president would have reassured and calmed the nation with his or her speeches, while Trump just stokes more panic with his. The net effect is that nobody trusts the government to protect them, and this may be good in that it forces people to rely on their own resources. Everyone is realizing, only I can save myself, which gets them focused on the practical things they can do to avoid the virus. In the end, this might be more effective and less costly than any government initiative. So one way or another, we have to achieve this stable state of herd immunity, where a certain proportion of the population has gotten the disease and the rest are protected by them. If people on the whole are paranoid about their own safety and diligently follow effective hygiene procedures, it is better for society because it means the R0 is lower and fewer people have to get the disease to achieve herd immunity. Trump may actually be helping things if he stokes paranoia and gets people panicked because you want people to take action. At this moment in history, a competent, soothing voice in the White House might actually be a bad thing if it lulls people into a false sense of security. So I don't want you to think I'm a Trump supporter, but sometimes an idiot can be useful.